so much. You may live in a very small country, but you have big hearts. I have been treated very well here, and I'm so thankful to the organizers and the sponsors and everyone who has made my day here fantastic. The gentleman over here said they saw an ape on the roof, but it turned out to be a Swedish tourist. So they often misbehave, especially when they drink hard liquor. I'm sorry for that. You know, I will just give you some rules to follow first. You cannot interrupt me. You have to equip yourself with paper and pen or pencil. And take down your questions and comments, and we'll take it after my presentation. Also, it's extremely important that you do not trust me. Never trust a pretty face. You have to read. Go to the sources. Read, think again, read more. It's all in the public domain. You can access it in various ways and control for yourself. I don't want anyone to say, oh, I did this and that because Olle Johansson from Sweden said that. No, you have to make up your own mind. Also, I will only present results from so-called peer-review-based scientific journals. And so that you can check me out, I will show the front page of each report. And again, they are all available in the public domain. And if you don't find it, I can send it to you so you can read for yourself. And today I will cover like 10-15 papers. And they're actually in the order of, and I haven't come up with this figure, it was a colleague who said it's in the order of between 12 to 25,000 publications that are relevant to tonight's topic. So there's a lot of reading to do. And I will try to kind of translate the scientific results to your own everyday reality. What does it mean when scientists publish their reports, often in very hidden journals? It's not your everyday reading. And what does it mean for your cells, your molecules, for your bacteria, the plants you have, for insects, birds, mammals, and nature as a whole? And of course including all people living here. Today we should discuss something which the Waldorf Steiner School in Bærum in Norway recently said no to. Something they don't want to have in their school and in their classrooms. And instead they have determined, together with other such Steiner Waldorf schools, to make their schools a wireless-free zone. Today we should discuss something which the insurance companies around the world, including Lloyd's in the UK, Reassurance in Switzerland, and If Scandi in Sweden, do not take any form of responsibility for. Society claims that all these techniques based on radiation and electromagnetic fields are safe, but that is not what the insurance company says. And they said it plainly at the meeting 2004 in London, where they spoke out and said, for them it's not a matter if, it's just a matter when the shit will hit the fan, and they will not be held responsible for it. They have learned their lessons from such scandals, such as the tobacco scandal, and they will not front such payments any longer. And this is all, for me as a scientist, learning from society that these rays we are talking about, these electromagnetic fields are safe, then it must be safe to insure them. There just couldn't be any monetary risk at all. Or could there? Today we should discuss something which telecom manufacturers and operators completely and totally refuse liability for. In all the licenses, agreements, and so on, they have written away any form of liability claims. They sell you something that is 100% safe, but they refuse to take responsibility for it. Furthermore, it has been revealed the last years that, for instance, children to CEOs of big telecom companies, such as Sony Ericsson, are not allowed by their father to use these gadgets themselves. Odd. For me, it's very odd, I must say. Today we should discuss something which the telecom manufacturers, for health safety reasons, tell you to keep at least 1 inch away from your body, or for which they have applied for technical patents based on cancer risk. Wait, they were safe, and now you should keep them at least 1 inch away from your body? Why? Well, the answer is very simple. The last 10 years, the telecom sector has realized that these gadgets may not be that safe, and to get away, especially in North American courts of law, they have decided to introduce in the instruction pamphlets and books you get when you buy, for instance, a mobile phone, the sentence, keep it at least 1 inch away from your body. If this was a mobile phone, how should I use it if I cannot touch it? The moment I use it, I have violated the strong information I have got from the manufacturers. And that they will tell you in a court of law. They will ask you, which hand did you actually use when you used your mobile phone? Well, mostly right hand. But we told you you cannot touch it. You have violated our strong information and instructions. That's very smart. I have regularly contact with people in law enforcement and legal issues in the United States, and they say that means you can never bring such a company to the court. It's just impossible because you choose to violate their instructions, given in writing as well. Today we should discuss something which the radiation protection authorities around the world say is completely and totally safe, but for safety reasons still suggest that we should use as little as possible. We should use a hands-free, and so on. Again, for me as a scientist, it's very odd. Either a gadget is safe or it is not. And all these stories I tell you now, they are very telling. In a way, I could end my lecture here because you already have all the answers. All these levels of society have their own way of dealing with these risks, and they have their own private precautionary principles. But you are not part of that. As consumers, you are not affected at all. Today we should discuss something which the radiation protection authorities around the world says give off very weak radiation, in spite of the fact that a single mobile phone to your head has a magnetic field strength equal to lifting several electric train engines to your head. And in Sweden, that's the highest occupational exposure that is allowed. And people using their mobile phone or their laptop or wireless device don't realize that they're holding on to several electric train engines from a magnetic field point of view. Today we should discuss something which the radiation protection authorities around the world say gives off very weak radiation, in spite of the fact that the current allowed public microwave exposure levels here in Gibraltar compared to the natural background are around 1 million times higher. That's 1 with 18 zeros and times. Just imagine if one of your lovely birds you have here tomorrow would have increased its voice strength 1 million times. What do you think would happen to this country, to your big rock? Well, it will be turned into sand, just by the sheer strength of that voice. That kind of exposure increases have never been used on this planet before. It's so new to us scientists So we lack ways of really mentally dealing with that. We could have done it if there would have been like 2 times more or 5 times more. Then we would have experimental setups, statistical models and so on to deal with it. But when we talk about 1 million times, that's not a weak exposure. In my world, that's a biblical exposure. It's bigger than astronomical increase.
Today we shall discuss something which the educational authorities, at least in Sweden and maybe here, claim will revolutionize teaching and learning, in spite of the fact that they have been used for years, many years, in Sweden, parallel to an enormous drop in pedagogic quality and learning capacity.
A fact that was brought up several times during the recent political party leaders debate in the Swedish public service television. Sweden is probably the most computerized country in the world. Every kid has many computers, many telephones, and still they are plummeting when it comes to learning capacity and learning quality. So again, for me, you know, I'm a very simple man. I'm very need-based. If I need water, I get it. If I need food, I will buy it. And I just can't see what kind of need we have covered in this way. I'm not impressed. And in Sweden, but we are not allowed to talk about this. It turns out that even at the authority level, when it comes to teaching and education, they admit that the children that mature the fastest and comes out the best are children that have gone to schools that traditionally do not use such gadgets or use them very seldomly, like Steiner Waldorf schools, Reggio Emilia and Montessori schools. Today we should discuss something which easily penetrates walls, floors, ceilings, and you. And while penetrating you, it feeds biblical levels of energy into your body compared to natural background, making molecules break, that has been shown many times, changing the behavior and molecular machine of your cells, that has been proven many times, damaging cells all the way to cell death, that has been proven many times, and feeding cell growth. Today we shall discuss something which lacks any form of biologically based exposure standards or even more so hygienic safety levels. Instead the safety of these gadgets are determined using so-called technical recommendations based on acute heating of fluid-filled plastic dolls. Does that make you feel safe? No, of course not. When I ask, for instance, parents, are you happy with this kind of safety discussion? They are horrified. They didn't understand, they didn't know, they hadn't had time to read. And I say again, you have to read yourself. But they are horrified. They didn't understand this at all. Remember that today we will actually discuss toys. These are not life necessities, such as clean water, clean air, food that can be eaten without risk, care, concern, love, and respect. Children who do not get these necessities of life will perish. Children who do not have e-readers and mobile phones still be mature to responsible and loving citizens. That you do not need to worry about. I will later on show you that the kind of electromagnetic fields that these gadgets use have been shown many times, and I will show you some of the papers, to have genotoxic effects. They damage DNA molecules. If these gadgets would have been a pharmaceutical drug during development or a food item to be launched to the public consumers, the international law says no. If genotoxic effects are shown during development of such a pharmaceutical drug or food item, it is not allowed to be developed any further. it is not allowed to hit the general public. Genotoxic effects are completely abandoned, forbidden. But not for these. And that's also very odd to me as a scientist. And that means that electromagnetic fields, from that point of view, is a genuine environmental toxin. And generally speaking, at least in Sweden, I don't know for here, we try to remove all these environmental toxins because life is at stake, and we need to really remove all these toxins. I would rather see that we use a simple problem-solving scheme, like, you know, I came here with an aircraft. I'm always impressed by the simplicity how pilots and personnel work. They have checklists, and they are never allowed to step out of the checklist and invent some own steps or disregard some steps. They just follow these steps, and that means that most of the aircrafts will arrive safely at their destination. I want to use such checklists, and in medicine, biology, and science we have such, but we are not allowed to use them for these gadgets, because then we could pinpoint all the problems and maybe also lay a foundation for hopefully Swedish industry to develop tomorrow's human-friendly green technology, and that we can sell every gadget once more, but in a safe form. Of course, as you understand, you are highly educated and highly intelligent, all of you, and there are conflicts of interest here. And as consumers and citizens, we allow still these conflicts of interest to be at play. And they could be politics, bank and finance, manufacturers, operators, greed instead of need. And we continue to accept that kind of role play. And maybe it's time to just say no. We cannot use that kind of model any longer. And I want to shift greed instead of need to need instead of greed. I think that would solve a lot of questions. Unrealistic maybe, but when I die, I want to feel that I did my best and morally and ethically the best. Because we have a responsibility to this generation and future generations, and we could never step away from that. As you will see later on, it impairs learning and alters moral conception and reduces belief in moral judgment. Do we really want to have that kind of an impact on mankind that already is morally pretty corrupt? No, of course not. And, you know, rats, mice, and so on are not that very different to human beings. And these experiments, by the way, have been done on human beings. They impact fertility, and I say we need a truth commission. I say we need to establish exactly who is responsible for this 24/7 human experiment. And we need clear liability contracts, which doesn't exist today. You are completely naked from a legal point of view. You have to understand that. And that's not unique for electromagnetic fields and health effects. The same goes for gene-modified food, nanotechnology, and so on. These companies, they are there for a profit, of course, and they should be in our current modern world. And they don't take chances with things they realize is very risky. And I repeat again, 2004 in London, the representatives of, for instance, Lloyd's UK said, it's not a matter of when for them. It's not a matter of if, it's just a matter of when. So they were sure that a catastrophe, small or big, will come in the future. And therefore, they took their hands economically out from these areas. I say we need a court of inquiry before the catastrophe. I get a little bit stressed when I meet people that
say that, well, we will deal with this when it happens. But Jesus Christ, we will see later on, then it may be too late. And I'm not trying to paint a dark image, just a real image. And I think it's time to react before and save money, save life, save health, instead of taking a chance, which obviously the operators, the manufacturers, the insurance companies won't be a part of. I also say, and this is important, I say we need an institute for common sense. And I have already inaugurated that, and I have said that I'm the director of it. And you are welcome to step up and be part of it. I think it's very, very clear and very simple many times when we talk about, for instance, environmental issues. It's not that big a deal. It's not that hard a question. It's pretty easy to solve if we really want to, and just using common sense. I say that we need a completely transparent scientific system based only on need and not on career, profit, and whatever. We cannot afford to have scientists making a career instead of making a contribution to society. It's just too much. I work at the Karolinska Institute. It's very famous for its Nobel Prize in medicine or physiology. But most people working there, they do work there for their career. It's not for you, it's not for society. And I think we definitely need to change that. Maybe you saw yesterday that the Nobel Prize in medicine or physiology has been announced, and it's 3 scientists who have described and discovered the GPS neurons, nerve cells of your brain. And this is ironic because people don't use their brain any longer. They are dependent on the GPS in their phones. And when the batteries are run out, they are just lost. In Sweden, you know, Swedes, they were famous together with other Scandinavians to find their way over oceans, across the Russian tundra and so on. And they get lost nowadays in Stockholm. Because they have ceased using their GPS neurons and are addicted to a gadget that will fail them in a critical moment. I say we must have a moratorium. It's a personal belief, you may say, but it's dependent and based on what I will show you in a few minutes. And I say we need it now. You know, I'm old. I will soon be gone. People will not remember me. But most of you are young. And please, act today. Do something, because you can change it. And maybe the human-friendly technology will be built and sold by Gibraltar. And then you will be richer than Japan ever was. Isn't that nice? So, there is a good side to it. Just seeing you here makes me realize that you are not at all sure that these techniques and gadgets are safe. Because if you were, then you wouldn't have come tonight. Also, which we discussed yesterday, at the meeting I mentioned about in London 2004, when I listened to people having been the, how do you say, the architects of all these, and we are talking about thousands of pages to write a concession or a contract between an operator and a country. It's very complicated to do that. But by doing it and introducing paragraphs clearly stating, no, we will not take any form of responsibility, I realized that the fight is already over. 2004. Seeing the insurance companies saying, no way, we will never ever take responsibility for this, I realized the fight is already over. If you are campaigners, or if you have doubts, if you are concerned, you won already 2004. And later on, it has been added more and more.
And I think it will just take some time before this realization and knowledge will seep through society. And when I come back in 100 years' time, or so, society will look different. And things will have changed. So I'm actually pretty positive about tomorrow. And I think you have the strength to really alter the future. Also, for instance, 2011, when the World Health Organization, they had a special cancer organ that is called the International Agency for Research on Cancer. When they decided to cancer classify radiofrequent fields in association with certain brain tumors, I also felt that, wow, the battle is over. They are already putting up different walls of defense, and they realize things that they really don't tell the general public, because you're exposed to ads and PR and new phones and new gadgets, and you buy and consume and you're happy with that. But in the background, things are being organized, and things are being acknowledged, and things are being precautionally treated. Which is good, of course. That's the way it should be. But I think still, and I will come back to that, it's important to also inform the general public. And this thing with the World Health Organization is very interesting, because, as you may know, they have a cancer classification system with a class 4. And class 4 means proven known cancers. So if radiofrequent fields from your mobile phone would have been safe, they would have put it in class 4, and they didn't. They put it in class 2B. And scientists, they argue, a number of them, that it should actually be in class 2A, which is the last before the top level. And maybe that will change. 10 years before 2011, now we are 21, then power frequent magnetic fields, which is the long word for household electricity, was also cancer classified in the same type, same category in 2B, and in association with childhood leukemia. That you probably already knew about.
With this
short introduction, and today I'm very short, I will just show you a few slides, and after that we can have a general discussion. Let's see now. Gentlemen, don't let hard work kill your life. Let electricity do it. Of course, electricity is fantastic. I just cannot imagine living in Sweden without it. Today I called my wife, and we live in Stockholm, and there it is today very dark, very strong gusty winds, it's raining, and it's just above the freezing point. I told her it was the same here. So she shouldn't feel jealous in any way. But with electricity, we can light our light bulbs, we can heat our houses, etc. So it has been an enormous advantage for a country like Sweden. And for every country, of course. But the thing is, you see, if you go backwards and read old documents, it turns out, and I will see if I could get this to work, yes, that certain, it's very hard to see, I guess. But you see in green, certain persons actually started very early to claim adverse health effects. And when you read their descriptions being subjected to the new electricity, and you remember, electricity from the beginning was the rich man's toy. It took a long time to get out generally into society. And a general electrification of Sweden was done in 1954, but still at that time, and still today, 2014, there are places not being supplied with electricity. but most people do have it nowadays. But when you read these anecdotal reports, you found out that they were actually talking in terms of what we today call electro-hypersensitivity. And this is at the, let's say, 100 years ago or more, 110, 120 years ago, such reports. And now we jump quickly from 1979 with the very famous scientist Nancy Wertheimer and Ed Leeper that in Denver, United States, found out that children with leukemia were more than twice as likely to have lived in homes near high current power lines where the electromagnetic fields were stronger. And this research was the basis for the World Health Organization to classify how frequent magnetic fields in 2001. And they have done a lot of very interesting observations. And again, it was such a painstaking and time-consuming, but a simple way of dealing with science. Nancy Wertheimer had a very old car, and she drove around in Denver, mile after mile after mile after mile, visiting, without telling people, the addresses where children had got and sometimes died from childhood leukemia. And she observed this environment, and then she found out that they always lived at so-called end poles, where the utility lines go back, and the fields are very high there. And later on they did a lot of other observations and experiments and blah, 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 and that was the foundation for this classification. Then we have the functional impairment, electro-hypersensitivity. And as you probably know, in Sweden this is an officially fully recognized functional impairment. This is important, it's not a disease. And this was done by the Swedish government in 2000, that's 14 years ago. At the same time, by the Nordic Council of Ministers, the same year, its symptoms were classified as an occupationally related symptom-based diagnosis, entering this international diagnosis code system called ICD. And the people with electro-hypersensitivity in Sweden have their own handicap organization, the Swedish Association for the Electro-Hypersensitive. They get a governmental subsidy each year, and they are included in the Swedish Disability Federation. Swedish municipalities just follow, which we all have to do, and I'm sure you have signed the same type of conventions and standard rules and so on as Sweden has, and they follow the UN 22 standard rules on the equalization of opportunities for people with disabilities, and it was upgraded in 2007. The first is from 1993, by the way, and 2007 it was upgraded into the UN Convention on Human Rights for Persons with Functional Impairments. And it's a very, very important type of document, and it regulates every person's life here on this planet. And it's very, very important. And it's very simple. I'm always impressed by the United Nations and other such bodies because they make our lives so very, very simple. It's a very big convention, it's a lot of text, but it boils down to one single sentence. People with functional impairments, such as electro-hypersensitivity, are entitled to have an equal life in a society based on equality. That's it. If you compare your incomes with each other, you realize that we are not there yet. We are not fully equal. Right? So we have a lot to do, but this is the aim for everyone. One of the most important principles to achieve this is the one about complete accessibility. In Sweden, for instance, this sentence has transformed Sweden completely. And nowadays you find a whole variety of accessibility measures, particularly for people with movement disorders and movement impairments. And it could be phased-off sidewalks, it could be leaning buses, it could be automatic sliding doors, it could be ramps, wheelchair ramps, etc. And the odd thing is, that was a surprise even to the United Nations, the numerical big winners are the whole population. Because these ramps and phased-off sidewalks and so on are used by the father with the baby pram, it's used by the woman with the shopping cart, by the bicycle, by the person with one of these, what do you say, boards, or these young people have, you know. Yeah, they love these because they could slide down and out into the road and up again. And that's interesting because that has sort of evolved into a new principle that accessibility measures is good for everyone. And if you just think for a moment, if we would clean society, electro-sanitize it, maybe the big winners are not only people with electro-hypersensitivity, but everyone who doesn't catch cancer, for instance. How many in here want to have cancer? No one, it seems. Well, then you would support accessibility measures for people with electro-hypersensitivity, because it will bring down exposure levels dramatically, and you will be the winners. In Sweden, and again, I shouldn't really write in Sweden, according to the UN, Sweden just follows these texts. Swedes are really followers, I would say, but that's good. Impairments are viewed from the point of the environment. No human being is in itself impaired. There are instead shortcomings in the environment that cause the impairment. Thus, it is the environment that should be treated, not the person. And the definition of a functional impairment is interesting too, because every person many times during his and her life will be functionally impaired. For instance, if I go to Spain, I will get very much impaired because I do not speak Spanish. And that is the definition, the UN definition of a functional impairment. And then I need an accessibility measure, and practically an economic thesis thing is that I have a personal assistant. Namely, someone that meets me at the airport and explains this is this and there and so on, you know. Oddly enough, when I get back to Sweden, I am not functionally impaired any longer because I talk Swedish. But my personal assistant, who traveled with me for some odd reason, he or she will suddenly be functionally impaired. So it's environmental dependent. And the Swedish government, they're doing a lot of very good things actually. And they have written, I don't know the English word for that, but a thick text, which is called the Swedish Action Plan for Persons with Impairments. And that was for 1999/2000. And the interesting part is the last one in green. It says in Swedish, from patient to citizen. Before this, people, and maybe most often so, civil servants, physicians and so on, they looked upon people with functional impairments as being some kind of a patient, instead of realizing it's the environment that is the patient. It's the environment that should be treated. And from this moment on, you are not allowed to talk about people with impairments in terms of impairments. Patients. They are citizens, and they are completely normal, and they do not have a disease, they are not ill, they are just functionally impaired. And again, this has other implications. Namely, if you try to force a person to quit one's employment or to move from one's home, it's a serious legal violation, which the UN stress a lot. And the same goes for children. You are not allowed to discriminate them from their educational rights. Never. And I hear that this, unfortunately, is not always true. Sometimes children are being treated in the wrong way, I would say. All over the world, this happens. You know, they have to quit school or go somewhere else, or they are forced to stay at the school where they don't feel well. So in essence, a person with a functional impairment like electrohypersensitivity shall just enjoy their human rights, nothing else. When I give lectures, for instance, for, should we say, non-believers, people that don't really support these ideas, I will start by asking them, do you want to give up one part of your human rights? And no one says, oh yes, I want to do that. No one. And then it's much easier to explain why they cannot force people with electrohypersensitivity to do that. Or do you not agree? Just think for a moment, if your loved ones have electrohypersensitivity, what would you then want from your country? Do not ask what you can do for your country, ask instead what your country can do for you. And not only can, they have to. If they have signed the UN Convention, they have to. Well, that was a little bit about the sort of legal status. I will quickly run through a few slides regarding scientific studies of electrohypersensitivity, and I will see if I can get this to work. Do you see it?
Well, I saw it on the wood, but not...
No, not there. Let's see. Do they have a long stick or something? No. But I will try to explain anyhow. You see here, these are photomicrographs taken in so-called immunofluorescence microscopy. And what we have done here is that we have compared the upper panel. You see a section from human skin of a person with electrohypersensitivity before being provoked in front of a visual display unit such as a computer screen or a household television set. And the bottom one after the provocation. And on each slide you see an upper portion which is the so-called epidermis of the human skin, and the rest going downwards is the dermis of the skin. And you know, the skin is so very, very, very important for you because it's the interface between each one of you and the rest of the universe. There you stop, and the rest of the universe starts. And it functions as an antenna. It has special sensory organs to pick up alterations in the environment. We call them eyes, ears, nose, and mouth with its taste system. We have vibratory senses, touch senses, and so on. And they maneuver the brain, because the brain is practically blind from that point of view, through a world, always adapting to changes, minute changes in our environment. The slightest change will result in a behavioral alteration or change. And to make a long story short, what we then could prove, and now we are back at the 1980s, we were not even born then. And we were studying people with electrohypersensitivity, and we could then see that they have a highly activated immune system, because the upper panel, if that would have been from a normal healthy volunteer, these very white, brightly shining cells you see would have been just a few. There's a lot of them. It's a highly activated immune system, which you would see if you provoke people with, for instance, nickel or pollen. You would see such an activation. It's telling the body, this is not good for you. Later on, the cells seemingly after this provocation, and they are sent in front of a household television set at a viewing distance of about 40-50 centimeters. They are seemingly gone, and actually they are. Because this is a classical image of a radiation damage. If we would have put the persons instead in front of X-rays or strong ultraviolet light or radar or radioactivity like from plutonium or uranium, you would have seen the same reaction. It's a textbook reaction to radiation. And that became very early our working hypothesis that these people are not menopausal women. They are not low educated people, which was put forward. They were not people subjected to mass media hysteria and so on. No, they are just damaged because of radiation. And we used different markers here to look at that. Furthermore, similar type of experiments, but now we're talking about another cell type called mast cells. You see for the micrographs, each small dot is a cell, and it's the mast cells, and they are the common denominator for clinical changes such as asthma and allergy. And I don't know for Gibraltar, but in Sweden we have had a skyrocketing increase in allergies and asthma. More than half of the children have at least one type of allergy or asthma, and for the whole population it's more than 1/3. If you go back to the 50s, you would hardly find people with allergies. They were very uncommon. So something has happened. And I'm not an amateur. I know there are confounders, there are other factors. But in these kind of very controlled experiments, where the only difference between left and right is that the right persons, they are from electrohypersensitivity, it's tempting to speculate that this is a radiation damage because the image you see to the right is exactly the one you would have found at Fukushima, at Chernobyl, at people harmed by X-rays, people harmed by radar, people harmed by strong ultraviolet light. This is a textbook image. And we did not treat them with these things. We only took them being electrohypersensitive compared to normal healthy volunteers to the left. Just a quick comment on the left panel. If we would have taken that 50 years before, you would have found even fewer cells. And that has a dramatic impact on, well, health systems, because the baseline levels for histamine and IgE has to be increased every year, because the whole population is slowly increase these levels. And you need a baseline to say, no, you are ill, you are not. But they're all rising. And the question is, why? I don't have a final answer, but of course, these are tempting to speculate. And then we took, if you just look on the C and D panel, we took normal healthy volunteers. They were medical and dental students. They were put in front of visual display units like household television sets, household computer screens, with their back 40 centimeters away. They sat there for 8 hours. They should tell us if they felt any subjective sensations, pain, itch, heat sensation, whatever. And no one reported any form of sensation. Some students said it was a little bit boring to sit with their back towards these computers and television sets. Well, they had to report everything, but that was the only thing. But the odd thing is that already after 2 hours, if you compare C with D, you don't need to be a scientist to realize that, wow, there is an increase in the mast cell population, as if we would have sat them down next to plutonium or X-ray, which we didn't, because that's forbidden. We cannot do that. But we can sit them down here. And that's interesting because they don't get any subjective sensations whatsoever, and still the outmost portion of the immune defense is activated. It's like small soldiers or fire brigade soldiers being collected at the outermost portion towards the universe, saying, hey, this is not good for you. Fight it or get out of here. Fight and flight. That's the answer to the body. And other scientists have shown with other cell types, like this from Belyayev and his co-workers, using lymphocytes, which is part of the immune system again, that they also react in parallel. Both normal healthy volunteers as well as people with electrohypersensitivity are reacting to, in this case, 50 Hz magnetic fields, and at that time the GSM frequency in Sweden, 915 megahertz microwaves. So maybe everyone is at stake, although the people with electrohypersensitivity, they are low consumers. They stay out of these situations. They have an avoidance, an active avoidance behavior. And maybe they will be tomorrow's winners, as will very poor people in parts of the world who cannot afford to build this high-tech infrastructure. So if we sort of talk in big terms, maybe they will be the ones left. The people with electrohypersensitivity and very poor people. It could be. Hopefully everyone will be here, but you know, I don't know. Australian scientist, a very famous cell biologist, Peter French, and this is actually a replication of previous investigations. People often ask, well, it needs to be replicated. This is a type of such replication, and he showed that the mast cells in Australia, they don't like either to be subjected to mobile telephony. They reacted as if they would have been subjected to pollen or nickel or any other allergy, but it was to the mobile phone frequency. And if I remember correctly, it was 835 megahertz. And it was at so-called non-thermal level. This is not an acute heating effect, which is important when we talk about guidelines, because they are based upon these fluid-filled plastic dolls and acute heating effects. This is far below that kind of levels. A Japanese colleague, Hajime Kimata, has done very simple and very interesting studies, and you see it's all from peer-review-based scientific journals. He allowed eczemas, cutaneous eczemas, to be subjected to mobile phone radiation, and they got worse. And he could also follow that in their blood samples of these patients by markers such as the last line, substance P and vasoactive intestinal polypeptide, which, when the eczemas got worse, they will rise in level in blood. And he just allowed these eczemas to be exposed to mobile telephony. Simple and very intelligent. In Sweden, we had in the 80s a debate which was very, how should I say, we are proud of it, to say the least. Especially physicians went to great strength trying to talk people down, to bullying them and harass them, and trying to call them names and so on. And of course, as a confounder, we have to realize that a person sitting in front of a visual display unit, like a computer, they could imagine things. They could have a pavlovian conditioning reflex. It's actually something else that makes this person react to this work situation. It's not the electromagnetic fields. It's not any allergy tendency. It's not the chemical factor. It's still, it's rather a personality issue or a coping phenomenon. The boss is not so nice, maybe. We have to live with that possibility, but it's so simple to solve that, and including mass media-driven hysterias and psychoses, mainly by using rats. Because rats don't have a human boss. They don't listen to radio, they don't watch television, they don't read newspapers, and still they react in a dramatic way when we subject them to electromagnetic fields that you are supposed to withstand.